Hi, this is your Sabni Bhartiya and welcome to State of Energy. We are here at Johns Hopkins University in Washington, D.C. and today we have with us Daniel Roesler, founder and CTO of UtilityAPI and working group maintainer of LF Energy's Carbon Data Specification Consortium. Daniel, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
First of all, talk a bit about what is UtilityAPI all about.
So Utility API is a utility data access platform that can be used by solar companies, energy efficiency companies, virtual power plants to request and download customer utility data. We operate a network of connectors across the United States and Canada to allow for easy data access so that all of these new innovative technologies can download and use customer data for their projects, for their analyses, to accelerate the energy transition.
How is UtilityAPI associated with LF Energy?
So we were approached by LF Energy a few years ago to develop a new open standard that can be used to provide data access for all of these new energy technologies so that it's not a mix of proprietary standards across the US and Europe and other parts of the world. We have been working on that with a working group that's part of what's called the Carbon Data Specification. And that Carbon Data Specification works on standardizing for carbon accounting, decarbonization projects, and grid flexibility projects across the world.
What kind of data are we talking about here?
That's a great question. So the customer data working group specifically focuses on if you think about a utility customer, it's going to be their kilowatt hours, their utility bills, all of that sort of things. Those vary substantially from utility to utility. One utility may calculate their utility bills one way, another may calculate it another way. Some utilities have smart meters, which reads meters on say a 15-minute increment. Some utilities still have a person walking around with a clipboard. And so the utility ecosystem is incredibly fragmented. And all of these projects and all of these companies looking to do carbon impact analysis, carbon accounting, energy trading, all of that sort of stuff, they need some sort of standardized digital access to that data for their customer projects. They have, say this building is looking to do energy efficiency upgrades or install EV charging in the parking garage. They're going to be working with a contractor that needs the kilowatt hours they use, the rate plan that they're on, the energy impact that they're on. This is all information that needs to be accessible to that contractor with customer consent. And so we're standardizing the way that that customer data can be accessed, can be adopted and scaled and used.
And who are the constituents or consumers or stakeholders of this data?
So the data itself is generally housed in what we call the centralized entity. So that would be your distribution utility or whoever kind of reads your meter and whoever sends you your utility bill. And so that is one constituency that this consortium is working to engage with. Other constituents are the people who are going to be using the data. And so these are your building energy managers. These are your technology providers, right? If you think about the Teslas of the world, if you will. And then thirdly, it's going to be the actual utility customer themselves. They have a need. They're asking themselves, what is my carbon emissions? What are my what are my scope 2 emissions, to be specific, right? That's a new question from the SEC. They are looking to answer those questions for their own carbon measurement purposes, and then also asking the question, what can they do about it? And that's where they engage the energy ecosystem, the private companies who are looking to help them improve their carbon impact.
And how is the overall energy market changing in terms of collecting data? We have renewables. It's not one-way traffic now, it's bidirectional. We have solars at home, we have EVs. Some EVs can power the house. It also is, the demand is also going up. what time to charge your EV when there's not too much load on the grid. So does data play a big role in getting that kind of information also? That's number one part. Let's talk about that part.
Absolutely. So there's two major components to how data plays a role in all of this new energy ecosystem. The major transformation that has happened, say 30 years ago, it was not economically viable to install all of these clean energy technologies. The economic viability is really driving adoption now. And so you have all of these distributed energy resources, energy efficiency technologies, heat pumps, fuel cells, all of these behind the meter things beyond the grid edge that are now important, and people are looking at them because they can actually pencil those projects. And so one of the major components for why data is important is because those technologies need an initial feasibility analysis. Like a building owner, like this building owner in this building, they're not going to agree to some installation, some upgrade, unless it actually like makes either financial sense or sustainability sense. They need some sort of initial feasibility analysis or audit to see whether or not which technology works where. That is underpinned by accurate data of what the building currently uses, what does the power market say, the emissions factors are, all of that sort of thing for those evaluations. And so standardizing data access around that is kind of a key blocker to scaling up adoption of clean energy technologies and grid flexibility things like virtual power plants, demand response, that sort of thing. And then the second part around data is actually monitoring, so measurement and verification of those resources, of those DERs, and participation in grid flexibility markets. All of those vendors that are operating those systems, all of those building management companies, those are going to need an ongoing feed of data in order to true up, to measure things, to verify things. And so there's both a initial deployment need for data. So how do you actually deploy millions of these things? And then there is a need for, once you have them deployed, you need to have some sort of standardized access to ongoing. You can't just keep manually sorting through bills every month.
When we look at this consortium, and can you talk about, is it about building software? Is it about standards? Is it about specifications?
It is about standards and specifications. So there are in existence many different platforms that already do the calculations for use case specific things, do the calculations for localized demand response, do the calculations for electric vehicle charging, doing the things for energy management in buildings. There are lots of different software platforms, some of which are open source as part of LF Energy's organization, but some of which are proprietary platforms that are run by, for example, Microsoft or something, right? And so this consortium is focused on developing interoperability standards so that those platforms, those software things that do the analysis, can automate connectivity with the grid. Because you have all of these amazing technologies that are happening and AI and all this sort of stuff learning coming to fruition behind the meter with the end customers, like the apps and all that sort of stuff. But they're really struggling to integrate that technology into the wider grid so that the grid can take advantage of it too. And so the standards that we're working on and we're trying to develop are really trying to bring the two, the central entities, the utilities, the ISOs, have them be able to establish easy connectivity and data sharing with all of these new innovative technologies that are happening behind the grid.
If you look at LF Energy, there are a lot of projects which are about data. Does your consortium, work closely with them, or if you can highlight some of the projects that are there which are critical to this whole, digital transformation or decarbonization efforts that are going on there?
The consortium and the standards that we're developing are still in the early stages. We just have some early drafts available for the customer data specification that we're starting to gather support for and get some review feedback on. we definitely want and are starting to engage with the other LF Energy projects so that they can start to either evaluate or use the best way that they can integrate or become compatible with these standards. So for example, the OpenSynth project, that is all about creating synthetic usage data for hypothetical scenarios. So you can do modeling, so that you can do like exploration. And in order to train those models, you need actual data. And so how do you get that data from utilities? If you're looking to do a specific region of a specific city and kind of create synthetic data for that, you may need data for that specific region. And so how you register, how you get connected with the actual data source, that's a specification that there might be compatibility for. Another example is OpenEE Meter, which is another LF Energy project. And what they do is they basically evaluate the performance of an energy efficiency project. If you install a heat pump, this is the performance you're getting out of it on an ongoing basis and how you go about calculating that. And so these are projects that need data, and currently they just expect the user to go get the data however they need to. You need to email the utility. You need to get the customer to just email you a file, blah, 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 right? There's some sort of data input. Well, that is a barrier to adoption because it's a manual step. And so if we can standardize and automate the access to that information, we can pipe these two things together, and all of a sudden it becomes just a one-click flow through.
Now, when we look at all these projects, we can get obsessed with all the work that is going on in the energy sector of these projects, but I think we are trying to solve a much larger problem for the planet itself. Climate change, climate crisis, decarbonization. What is the role of data in these efforts at a larger scale to actually solve this bigger problem?
Data itself is incredibly important to solving the climate crisis. One component that we are focused on the carbon data specification is really looking at the mechanics of how data is shared and and formatted to be interoperable with each other. And the reason why that's important is because in order to run an energy grid with intermittent renewables, when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, and you have batteries and electric vehicles plugging in and unplugging and all of this sort of stuff, it's the most complex machine on the planet. In order to operate that on a day-to-day basis and keep it stable in a clean energy world, that requires a huge amount of data to be transferred between all the different parties because it's an incredibly fragmented system. It's not going to be one worldwide utility. It's going to be utilities and EV companies and energy management companies and all of these sort of players and politicians trying to get all of their way. And so being able to efficiently transfer data between those two is the way you operate a 100% renewable grid, for example. Secondarily, being able to study that grid needs access to that data. And there are huge amounts of concerns around who can access this data. It's private customer data. If you have 15-minute increments of kilowatt hours on your house, somebody can tell when you're gone, when you're there, when you're showering in the morning, that sort of thing. Like it's personal information. And so treating that as personal information is a very big concern for the amount of analysis that needs to happen. And so these are the topics that we're talking about and that we're studying and that we're trying to create some consensus around so that we can both protect customer privacy while also streamlining the process of getting all of these devices into the new energy ecosystem.
While this problem is kind of global for everybody, energy sector is unique in a way that every country, of course, we cannot even talk about how many plugs I have to carry when I have to travel globally, but different standard, different specifications, TSOs, DSOs, different consumption models. When you look at this consortium, are you looking at building something which is global, or at this point, even if you look at LF Energy, is more or less Europe centric, but now we have this event here, so we are spreading.
Yeah.
How do you look at it?
I look at it from the point of view of where are the barriers now, and that is in the areas that are leaning into the energy transition. States in the US, TSOs and DSOs in Europe, they're all kind of like leaning into, hey, how do we get the energy transition to happen faster? Things like the Inflation Reduction Act are really driving that, hey, we want this to happen. We're putting our dollars behind it. This is what we want to have happen. Let's figure that out. And so we're focusing on how do we unlock and like unleash that amount of capital and an incentive to really accomplish its goals. Because what we don't want to have happen is for a bunch of momentum to get started with these policy initiatives, with these countries who are wanting to do these things, and then they just kind of fizzle out because it's too hard to actually deploy the things. That's a big risk, is you have the dollars, but you don't have the infrastructure to be able to deploy those dollars. And so we saw this, for example, in Puerto Rico after the hurricane hit, and we saw that it was really a struggle to get a lot of the energy transmission back online with a lot of the rebuilding, just because of the, not bureaucracy, but just infrastructure, lack of infrastructure to be able to accomplish the things that the policymakers wanted to accomplish, and the populations, through the eyes of the policymakers and the governments, wanted to happen. And so we see one of the things that we try to keep in mind when developing these standards is we have to be realistic. We can't deal in theory, because the theory won't deploy all of the assets that we need to make the energy transition happen. We have to deal in the reality. And so we really try to attack the barriers and the problems of the reality and make them, and try to fix or streamline them so that they are not a barrier, or that they're a minimal barrier.
Since you mentioned earlier politicians as well,
Yeah.
when Donald Trump was president, he pulled out of Paris Accord. Biden came in and they joined. So we also the world also kind of relies on these political decisions, which could be, once again, politics is politics, you cannot do.
Yeah.
But are there any efforts going on, even by the industry or like non-profit organizations? Because this is not a political problem. This is an existential problem.
Yeah.
So that you folks, all the effort that are going on, or are kind of foolproof when it comes to politics, so that just because a politician comes and change the face of the world for the next 50 years.
Yeah. So energy is a very political space. That is absolutely true. But one of the key aspects, and you could say this is a benefit or a detraction of the energy space, is that the political regions of energy are extremely fragmented. You have your local public utility commission or your local city council for your municipal utility, and they have a huge amount of power over what happens in their territory, going up to the state level, going up to the national level, and even like the regional or global level for something like Paris. And so we don't necessarily, the expectation for how to fight climate change is not just a one shot to try to get a national thing. It is a discussion at every level of government and every level of policymaking, all the way down to the local city council, all the way up to the national or UN level discussion around treaties or incentives or accords. And so I guess I'm optimistic about the world's ability to solve this problem, because you have so many players who have so much individual power for their individual territories. Like when we saw the previous administration pull out of the Paris Climate Accords, We saw a huge increase in local jurisdictions who have governing oversight over their own power regions have commitments or come up with their commitments or do the things that they needed to do because it's such a fragmented government in the energy sector. And so that is very resilient to the sways of any particular administration or any particular national interest. Does that make sense?
Now let's go back to talk about the working with the consortium. Talk, because you said your early stage. Talk a bit about what kind of roadmap you have. Just rough roadmap. Number one. Number two is that what kind of people should get involved and how they can get involved.
Absolutely. So the working group is in its early phases. We have some initial drafts that we have written that are currently under review. There are parts that we need to fill out more and specify more. And we are really looking to grow the stakeholders that are reviewing the specifications because we want this to be a consensus in the energy community. And so for policymakers who are looking to mandate data access or deal with the privacy around data access, we encourage them to join the mailing list for the CDSC, which is customerdata.carbondataspec.org. And we are also looking for utilities who may be looking to offer data access in a standardized fashion to join the mailing list. We are also looking for people who need data, the folks who are consuming the customer data, to be able to have their say in how these things get deployed, because that's what we're looking for, all the help we can get and all the voices we can get at the table to be able to really have a strong adoption and strong consensus around the usefulness of these specifications.
When we talk about data itself has no value. We have to extract value from the data.
Yes.
And now when it comes to data and extracting value, we have to talk about AI. And now the biggest topic is Gen AI. What kind of scope do you see of AI and Gen AI in getting this smart data from the meters or all those different?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we are looking at more and more is privacy around customer energy data and how that plays into broader analysis and machine learning, AI, around that energy data. What sort of aggregation do we need to do? I mentioned the OpenSynth project earlier. That is an effort to generate synthetic data for training AI models, but the common term is garbage in, garbage out, if you don't have good data going in. At the specification at the CDSC, we are really focused on ensuring that privacy standards are met while also enabling all of these new technologies like AI to be able to accomplish their goals as well.
Daniel, thank you so much for taking time out today. Of course, talk about the consortium and the bigger problem in the ecosystem and how you folks are working on addressing some of those. Thanks for great insights, and I look forward to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.